If I want an infinitely large world, I'll need a way of procedurally generating an infinite amount of structures. In theory, this shouldn't be too hard. I just need to spawn, scale, and rotate a bunch of cubes to form the houses. But there's one big problem. Building houses this way means that every cube on the screen is a draw the CPU needs to make to the GPU. With hundreds of cubes on the screen, the CPU will need to tell the GPU to draw a cube hundreds of times. But luckily, there is a solution that can help us fix this. It's called a hierarchic HISMs will basically let you place any number of identical meshes, which will all be rendered with a single draw call. But there's one issue. With HISMs, all the meshes need to use the same material. This means that I need to find a way to make one material that can somehow display a different texture for every instance of the cube. It's basically Schrödinger. What name is this? Where is this even from? I don't even realize that I can't pronounce things until I go to pronounce them, and then it's... I mean, I got the guy right? This is the guy with the cat? The cat that's alive and dead? Yeah. Okay, well... You know, this guy's material. One way of doing this would be to put all my textures into an atlas. Then I could have every cube scale its UVs onto a different part of the atlas depending on which texture I want them to use. Where my material doesn't actually use UVs. Because UVs don't scale with their mesh, I need to use what's called a world-aligned texture in order to be able to scale the cubes without the texture stretching. Another option would be to add a bunch of textures together, but multiply them by switches before the addition, so that you can basically turn them on and off. In this example, only texture 2 is being multiplied by 1, while everything else is being multiplied by 0. So when we add them all together, we get nothing plus texture 2 plus nothing equals texture 2. By turning these switches on and off, we can control which texture goes through. But the problem with this is that Unreal still needs to sample all the textures, even the ones that are turned off. And by the way, samples are bad. We want a low amount of samples. They're not good for performance. Sampling 3 textures for every pixel isn't that bad, but what if I want 5 different textures, or 10? To make things worse, world-aligned textures will sample its input another 3 times. So that means if I combine 10 textures this way, we end up sampling all of these textures 3 times, which is a total of 30 samples. So this won't work either. It's way too bad for performance. There is one really good solution though. It's called a texture array, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's an array with a bunch of different textures in it that I can basically scroll through using this number. But of course we run into another big problem. For some reason you cannot turn a texture array into a world-aligned texture. This means that my textures from the texture array will stretch and scale with the cubes. In order to fix this, we basically need to write our own version of the world-aligned texture, but one that is compatible with the arrays. So how do world-aligned textures actually work? Well, on a very basic level, we pretty much just take the texture and splat it on every axis of the mesh. This is actually why world-aligned textures triple the amount of samples. We're not just applying the texture once, we're applying it a total of 3 times. For the record, I actually fixed the sampling problem in a bit of a weird way. My version does leave this weird warping between the axes, but because we're mostly using cubes, this warping won't be visible. Finally, with this new world-aligned function, we can use our texture with... And finally, with this new world-aligned function... And finally, with this new world-aligned function, we can use our texture array with no stretching. And also, I do want to talk about the weird texture that I put on the thumbnail. It's not really related to anything I talked about so far, but I do think it's pretty cool. So normally textures are just images that are wrapped around a 3D object to add a form of detail. These textures basically work the same way, except we remap the R, G, and B channels. I would think that most people watching this are familiar with RGB, but in case you're not, if you zoom really far into a computer screen, you'll see a bunch of lights. In each group or pixel, you'll see a red, green, and blue light. If we turn on only the red lights, we see a red screen. Same for the green and blue lights. But by turning on a combination of these, we can display almost every color visible to the human eye. For example, if we do 50% red and 100% blue, we get this purple color. In order to display images on the screen, we need a number for the red light, the green light, and the blue light for every pixel that makes up the image. Now, in order to texture my world, I could just draw the texture that I want and wrap that around the cube. But by drawing exclusively with red, then green, then blue, later it becomes really easy to split these colors apart and remap them to new colors. Now when I want to create variants of my textures, I don't need to redraw them. I can simply change the mappings. And the cool part is, I don't even need to change the mappings manually. I can have the computer randomly select colors on its own, contributing to the procedural generation. Right now I know that all the houses still kind of look copy-pasted, despite the point of this being to remove repetition, but I'm hoping that with every new component that I add, the amount of variation will go up exponentially. Actually, I don't know if I'll be adding more. I may or may not have already lost interest in this project. My goal was originally to take the spell system that Noita has in place and try to create something similar, but with melee combat, it's genuinely so fun to try to make the most out of your spells and combine them together in ways that almost make you feel like you're cheating. I also really like the idea that you progress not by leveling up, but by getting better at problem solving and building knowledge of the game. But I'm having a really hard time seeing how this could translate to a melee system. If any of you have ideas, let me know. Maybe you have an idea that, when I see it, will make me want to add it to the game. But generally, if I lose interest in my idea before I feel like I'm at least a third of the way through, it's generally a good sign that I either need to make a big pivot or it's time to move on to something else. But we'll see.